Hi, this is Mark Ias. I'm putting out a small video series as an encouragement. And this small series deals with an event in history when the Assyrians invaded Judah and then laid siege to the city of Jerusalem. This is recorded in the Bible in three different places, in Isaiah 36 and 37, in 2 Kings 18 and 19, and in 2 Chronicles 32. There are Wikipedia articles about the king at that time, Sennacherib. There's even a British Museum event that points at the Assyrians at that time, at the height of their power. And Lord Byron, of all people, created a poem commemorating this event. Now, there are some parallels between that invasion and our current coronavirus invasion that I think might help our hearts. But beware, there is some irony in comparing these because many believe that the Assyrians were wiped out, that a besieging army was wiped out at this time by a plague or an infection. Also, I want it to be known, I'm not trying to criticize a particular country or people or government. I hope God is making it clear that we're all in this together. So let's talk about this historical Assyrian invasion. We can start by reading from Lord Byron's poem. It starts like this. The Assyrian came down like a wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold, and the sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea. Keep in mind, this was terrifying for the Israelites. There is a website, Aletheia, about an ancient Assyrian art exhibit, and I'll quote a few things from it. It says, "A new exhibit at the British Museum shows that even by the standards of the time, their cruelty was legendary. His palace at Nineveh contains some of the ancient world's most impressive and informative carvings created during his lifetime, mainly to intimidate visitors. Viewers should be grateful that the full color effect of this stonework has been lost over the millennia. But what the carved stones reveal is not just the carefully administered butchery of the time, but also the more pleasant side of life." Well, isn't that nice? The most pleasant side of life. Boy, these guys were nasty. In this video, our Bible text will be the Isaiah version of this event. And here are some excerpts from Isaiah 36. "In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, attacked all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. Then the king of Assyria sent the Rabshakeh along with a massive army from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. The Assyrians stood near the conduit of the upper pool by the road to the fuller's field. Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, who was in charge of the palace, Shebna, the court secretary, and Joas, son of Asaph, the court historian, came out to him. Then Rabshakeh said to them, 'Tell Hezekiah, the great king, the king of Assyria, says this. What are you relying on? I say that your strategy and military preparedness are mere words.' And then in verse 8, 'Now make a deal with my master, the king of Assyria. I'll give you 2,000 horses, if you can supply riders for them.' And then in verse 12, 'But the Rabshakeh replied, Has my master sent me to speak these words to your master and to you, and not to the men who are sitting on the wall, who are destined with you to eat their own excrement and drink their own urine?' Oh, and I am sure that that last bit of shock was very intentional in this excerpt in the Bible, because the same exact phrase is also recorded in the 2 Kings account. The Assyrians were widely and well known, and their coming had been prophesied about. It had been anticipated with dread, and I'm sure there were even some who just tried to get on with their lives and hope the threat never came to pass. Now, if you're like me, I can actually be afraid of being afraid. And so I try not to listen or to see so much or too much so that I'm not overwhelmed. But let's read this account from Isaiah just to set our minds at ease. This is in Isaiah 37 in verse 22. This is the word the Lord has spoken against him, meaning Sennacherib. Virgin daughter Zion despises you and scorns you. Daughter Jerusalem shakes her head behind your back. Who is it you have mocked and blasphemed? Who have you raised your voice against and lifted your eyes in pride? Against the Holy One of Israel. And then at the end of that chapter in verse 36, it says, Then the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. It's interesting. The Bible dismisses an army of 185,000 in one verse. Now, Lord Byron's poem, and by the way, it's entitled The Destruction of Sennacherib, offers a little bit more color. And it goes like this in the middle of the poem. Like the leaves of the forest when autumn hath blown, that host, referring to the army, on the morrow lay withered and strewn. For the angel of death had spread his wings on the blast and breathed in the face of the foe as he passed. And there lay the rider, distorted and pale, with the dew on his brow and the rust on his mail, and the tents were all silent, the banners alone, the lances unlifted, the trumpet unblown. And Lord Byron focuses his poem on their defeat, because it must have been just as epic as their invasion was, if not more. And I wonder if Lord Byron thought the Bible didn't spend quite enough time describing this epic defeat. So why does the Bible spend 2 whole chapters in 2 places on the build-up and 1 verse on their defeat? Well, that might be because often that's where we live. We suffer fear and loss and uncertainty, and we don't know how to process it all. But for just a moment, let's play historical novelist, if you will, and put a little bit more detail, by guessing, into the story to see if there's any encouragement that can be found. Firstly, we don't know for sure that a plague wiped out the Assyrians. It's quite possible, it's even likely. The Egyptians claim to have been saved from the Assyrians by a plague carried by mice, maybe the modern hantavirus. We know that Hezekiah diverted the water sources so that the invaders had no clean water. So maybe cholera from tainted water wiped them out. Now, it's probably a foregone conclusion that the Assyrian army pillaged the countryside and probably stole food, meat, provisions. Could tainted meat have caused their trouble? Let's suppose that it actually was tainted meat and it was stolen from an unfortunate Hebrew family or two. How do you think that might have felt? Maybe it was something like this. It's not bad enough that they killed my friends and destroyed our land and devastated our cities and ruined our economy and burned down my home and my village and drove us all before them like cattle all the way to Jerusalem. But to add insult to injury, we go hungry because they stole our food? Where is God in all of this? Well, we have the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. We can see now that if it did happen this way, God did something immensely powerful and surgically precise all at the same time. He prevented the villagers from eating food that might have wiped out their village. You can say thank you. And used it to wipe the invaders from their land. Now, could God have explained this to the villagers? ahead of time? Probably not. Let's try it. You see, there's this microorganism. No, don't go bother looking for it for a few centuries because it's too small to see. But I'm going to take one of these teeny tiny things, and I'm going to take one of them, and I'm going to use it to wipe out that sea of 200,000 or so spears. Could God have explained? That'd be very doubtful. I suspect that people would want to keep the meat, saying, we can't see anything wrong with it. It does more good keeping us alive than betting on some harebrained scheme about invisible fairies or microorganisms, whatever. Well, we could ask the same question. Where is God in our current pandemic? Doesn't he care about us, about me, about thousands who have died or their families? About the fact that I lost my job, or I lost my income, or my income's reduced, or about the fact that we're locked inside, like I am right now, limited medical help, loneliness, fear. What about an uncertain future or economy? Well, I think he does care very much. And God is probably right next to us where he often is, creating an impossible victory that he may not be able to explain to us just yet. There was a prophet, Habakkuk, that had a question like ours. And we read from Habakkuk 1, "How long, Lord, must I call for help and you do not listen, or cry out to you about violence and you do not save? Why do you force me to look at this injustice?" But 2 chapters later, that same prophet concluded toward the end of chapter 3, "Though the fig tree does not bud, and there's no fruit in the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen, and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will triumph in Yahweh." The prophet triumphs at the end of his words, even though he does not see the ending yet. And I hope for all of our sakes that we can find our way to triumph, even though we don't see the ending yet. God is still working, even in the worst of times.